Hi, everyone. We are going to talk about Chapter 3 from our text, Living with Art, Themes of Art. We will look at a few of those themes that were in the book and one extra one. And then we will look at presidential portraits and the art that relates specifically to Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald, who did the presidential portraits for the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery of Barack and Michelle Obama. Let's start with our themes. So in art, a theme is usually about life, society, or human nature, but can be any other subject. Themes are fundamental and often universal ideas explored in a work. Themes are usually implied rather than explicitly stated. Deep thematic content is not required in a work, but the great majority of works have some kind of thematic content, not always intended by the author. Sometimes it is. Analysis of changes or implied change in dynamic characteristics of the work can provide insight into a particular theme. So, a theme is not the same as the subject of a work. For example, the subject of Star Wars is the battle for control of the galaxy between the Galactic Empire and the Rebel Alliance. The themes in Star Wars might be moral ambiguity, when we talk about Darth Vader, for example, or the conflict between technology and nature. Often nature is seen as pure when we think about the Ewoks, when we think about the idea of the Jedi, and that somehow what they are into is not as technologically overt as the Galactic Empire in terms of them building a Death Star. We usually find that the Rebel Alliance is in a frozen world or in a jungle type world, and they're usually a little more in tune with nature. Now, I want to start with a theme about the idea of artists constructing alter egos or fantasy egos or mythology egos for themselves that they dwell in psychologically. So, like actors, artists who work in video or photography or performance art may make a character that allows them to explore parts of themselves or to play other people in history. And this is true in Mary Reed Kelly's work, in particular, her film Sadie the Saddest Sadist. And in this film, we find that Mary makes the costumes. She draws and designs out the costumes. She does the makeup with the very strange eyes that I think add intrigue to her work. She also works in 3D programs, creating the backgrounds, and she writes all the scripts. And her scripts are really verbally astute and adept. This video that I want to show you a little bit of is ARTH 21. It's 3 minutes and 52 seconds long, but I want to look at the last couple minutes where she has made a number of characters that she's playing. She's playing these characters in World War I. This is her here, playing a writer who is visiting a sex worker. And then she's also playing the sex worker. And the difficulty in doing the sex worker, she found, is that there's not really a lot of evidence of these sex workers. And she talks about what her role is in trying to make this work.
Let us know that they were there at all. I learned the classics at my father's knee. He put verses in my mouth, which I'd mangle. A forgetful and a frigid prodigy, unable to express my Sturm und Drangel. Trauma as experienced by women is often cut off quite deliberately from artistic expression or artistic experience. Many men who did all kinds of work during the First World War would have written poetry, they would have written a memoir. Women just didn't have those kinds of opportunities to process what had happened to them, so they couldn't put the trauma anywhere other than into the deep, dark recess of history. In terms of what my role is in it, it's almost the only way that you can reconstitute that experience that is so lost is through art, is through imagination.
Do you recall my home? It was en route. Your army sacked it as I bawled my eyes out. Quite helplessly, but in this setting, I'm alpha female and I'm alphabeting that you can author, but can't spell disaster. You're slow to learn, which makes the cleanup faster.
So that was Mary, again, creating a character for herself. We'll see that in several different instances, including Cindy Sherman and her Untitled's. And let's go on to some other themes that we find in art. The sacred realm. So we will find that there is a lot of art made in the service of different religions. And those religions are asking questions in their art like, who made the universe? How did life begin? What's its purpose? What happens to us after we die? And every religion has paintings, some have sculptures, and many have sacred buildings. And the sacred buildings that we're looking at in this slide is an Islamic prayer hall of Abdul al-Rahman in the Great Mosque in Cordoba in Spain. We're seeing these double arches that are striped that is very emblematic of the Spanish Moors and Islam in Spain. And the building, when nobody is in it praying, has a kind of really empty look to it that sometimes is very different than Christian churches or Catholic churches that have pews and seating. In the Muslim religion, you pray on your knees on a prayer mat. And this, I think, in Spain, you get really interesting mixtures of Spanish and Moorish, Christian and Islamic traditions that really weave, I think, for some really great art. The image on the right is the interior of the upper chapel at Sainte-Chapelle. This was built for the King of France to house their relics. And what I think is amazing about this place is that when you look at it, look how much stained glass there is. And it looks impossible to me. How is that heavy ceiling being held up by these tiny little vertical tracers here? It looks like faith is what's holding it up, and all the colored light coming in. And it's really beautiful when you see the light and the color coming in from all the stained glass windows. So this is to house King Louis IX's relics, including the crown of thorns. He believed also that he had a piece of the true cross as well. Now, on the outside of the building, it includes, again, not only all this glass, but includes things like rose windows that we find in Gothic churches. And what's interesting is on the outside of it, that's what reveals what's holding up all the stained glass, is you have this kind of buttress on the outside of the building that is hidden when you're in the prayer chapel on the top floor, and that creates the illusion of the building being somewhat miraculous. And you'll also notice here that the steeples are very similar to maybe a crown, a really flamboyant Gothic crown that perhaps the king might wear. It's very clear that this chapel belongs to the king. Another theme that we find are politics and the social order. So questions that this art might be trying to answer are: how can a stable, just, and productive society best be organized? Who will rule and how? What freedoms will rulers have? What freedoms will citizens have? How is wealth to be distributed? How is authority to be maintained? And art often does this, sometimes in the service of a government, sometimes questioning the government and how the government operates. And I think we have both of those in this particular slide. On the left, we have a painting of Washington, George Washington, crossing the Delaware by Emmanuel Lutze from 1851, probably about 80 years after the event itself. And we are seeing a very heroic Washington standing on the bow of the ship as they are about to sneak attack the German Hessians, the mercenaries who are fighting for the British, rather than fighting them kind of in a fair fight where maybe they don't stand much of a chance. So for them to win, they got to do this kind of underhanded trick in sneaking across the river and then attacking the Hessians while they're in their barracks. Well, the story sounds less heroic than the painting. In the painting, the flag is flying, he's standing on the bow, not hiding. And we also see kind of what we saw in the last chapter from the signing of the Declaration of Independence. We see this very positive light starting to stream out of the clouds of the morning. Again, the light to me is somewhat giving us a sense that God or fate is on the side of these people committing a kind of terrorist attack or a sneaky attack that isn't necessarily maybe fair or considered fair at the time. So that painting you have seen in American textbooks. It's a pretty common painting when you study civics. The other painting I think is far more interesting. This is a painting by Robert Colescott from 1975. And what we're seeing is him taking the original painting and changing the symbolism and changing the context. So here we are looking at a black artist named Robert Colescott. He is taking racist images of black-faced and black people as cartoons that would have been seen in popular media, that would have been seen in traveling minstrels. And he has taken that blackface that has probably been used against him in racially motivated ways, and he is now using those symbols and projecting them outward. Now we see George Washington Carver crossing the Delaware. He is a scientist. He is someone who worked with planting peanuts across the United States. And then we're seeing really unflattering stereotypes. We're seeing the logo for Uncle Ben's Rice, a slave cook who is rowing. We are seeing a mammy like Aunt Jemima who was on a syrup bottle. We are seeing a guy playing a banjo. We're seeing a guy fishing. We're seeing a guy drinking out of a jug. So he is kind of subverting what this heroic image is of Washington and white people building America. And we are looking at the real people that are doing the back-breaking labor who built America and should be recognized for their efforts. Obviously, when we think about stability and art that is servicing that stability, we might think about the great pyramids of Menkaure, Khafre, and Khufu. These pyramids are nearly 5,000 years old, and they represent the tombs of these three pharaohs and their journey into the afterlife. And they also somewhat stand up as the symbols of a religion and a form of government in the pharaohs that lasts for a few thousand years. and they're still standing today. And frankly, they're quite mysterious. They were looted before we really ever got to know what was in the tombs. We don't know exactly how they were built, but they stand as a sense of order and also stand in for how long Egypt has been around. In Pablo Picasso's Guernica, we are seeing a 25-foot by 12-foot painting in black and white of the Nazis bombing civilians in the Spanish Civil War. And we are seeing this in Picasso's Cubist style. We are seeing the kind of horror that comes from civilian deaths in war, people burning alive. We see a triangular image here of a knight, broken sword, and a horse that's dying. We're seeing a woman holding a dead baby. And maybe our eye is symbolic of the eye and the light here, and the person shedding light on this. It's a very powerful painting. Stories and histories. So the deeds of heroes, lives of saints, folk tales passed on through generations, episodes on television that everybody knows by heart, all shared stories that create a sense of community. And artists often turn to these stories to reach in their culture's collective memory. This is a painting done by Cecita. He is an Italian artist. We are seeing 2 episodes of the life of St. Francis. St. Francis of Assisi, he starts the Franciscan monks, a reformative monastery in the church, taking vows of poverty. And we see him having a dream where he is approached by an angel and told about the city of God, this perfect place of humanity where ethics and morals and the right amount of religious devotion are in the entire society. Using this arch as a spatial cell, kind of like in a comic book how they divide images on a page, we see also Cecita with a halo who is renouncing his wealth. And symbolically, we're seeing that by him giving up his blue, very expensive coat and giving it to a beggar. So probably in the time, most people would have known, because the church was so dominant culturally, especially in Italy, would have probably known about Francis, probably would have known about these stories, and then these stories are being made more clear by having illustrations. Another theme that I think artists use a lot today is the here and now. What is it like to be alive right now? What are your experiences in life that you can share that shed light on all of our experiences, or give some kind of window into experiences that maybe you have had but we have not had but would understand through your art? We see that in 2 different images here. On the right, we're looking at a wooden sculpture that was made around 1990 BCE. And we have an official named Menkaure. He is depicted at the center of this scene, and he is a scribe, I believe, and he is taking account of the things that I'm not sure if he's the scribe, but he definitely has wealth, and we are seeing his cattle being driven by, and the scribes that are there, he is taking account of the things that he owns. The painting on the left is one that I find to be really, really great. This is Edward Hopper's Gas. Edward Hopper painted a lot of paintings of isolation in cities in the 1920s and the 1930s and 40s. He did a very famous painting called Nighthawks. Many of you have seen this, of a couple in a diner late at night. So here we are, we're seeing a gas station attendant who has worked a hard day. Night has fallen. We're seeing the shadows in the trees, a road leading to nowhere. We're seeing the lights coming on in the gas station. We see the brand of gas here, and he is swept up. He has cleaned up, he's done his job, he's locking the pumps and getting ready probably to go home to his family. And to me, this is a really special painting to remind us of all of the people who work jobs that they probably don't particularly enjoy, but do it for their family, for their children, to make their lives better, to survive. And I think that certainly what they do is worthy of the nobility of great art. Robert Rauschenberg, an artist from the mid to late 20th century, he has found a number of images in Windward in 1963. He's silk screening and he's also painting in oil. And we are seeing a number of images that is kind of making up a giant-like scrapbook. Images of the Statue of Liberty, the Sistine Chapel, sun-kissed oranges, Manhattan rooftops and their water towers, building facades, construction workers and hard hats. We are getting this real energetic work that seems to center quite a bit around life in New York City, but also is taking us to a different place in time with the chapel as well. The human experience as a theme. So the way to define the human experience is we are all born, we pass through childhood, we mature into sexual beings, we search for love, we grow old, we die, we experience doubt, wonder, happiness, sorrow, loneliness, and despair. In this painting by Dutch painter Johan Vermeer, we're seeing a woman holding a balance. The painting is still. We find a very gentle northern Dutch light, and she is young, she is well dressed, she looks pregnant, but probably that was a style of clothing that was popular at that time, again showing her wealth. She has a jeweler's balance, and she is weighing out her jewelry in a very quiet, contemplative way. This is kind of like a vanitas that we saw earlier. Young, beautiful people who are smart, who have wealth, and then we typically would have the skull. Here, instead of the skull, Vermeer has placed a painting behind her head of the Last Judgment, where Christ has come back and it is the end of the world and he is saving souls from being damned who are Christian. So again, like a vanitas, this is a painting that reminds us that you can have all of these things in life, yet you should always be aware that death is inevitable, and you should have your spiritual house in order. Another theme that we find is invention and fantasy, and sometimes like a poet, the artists are conjuring up images, bringing imaginary worlds to life. Comic books certainly do that very well. And we're looking at The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. It is a triptych. When it's closed, it's in black and white. It's an image of the earth. And it has 3 panels. I want to blow this up for you to kind of show you really what we got here. So on these 3 panels, on the left, we have Adam and Eve and Christ. We have some kind of strange animals here. We got animals that I think are real, animals that I think are fabricated in this pond. I think we're looking at the Garden of Eden. This is some kind of an apple tree. And in the background, it's getting stranger. This building here that looks like it's maybe made out of the husks of fruit. A giraffe, but not really a giraffe like anatomically correct. We got some unicorns. We've got a doe-eyed dog head on 2 legs. And as we go further back in space, again, everything is getting stranger in this garden. In the world we live in our Garden of Earthly Delights, we have strange flying objects and animals. more of that weird architecture that we were looking at. People frolicking nude, riding animals, going into part of an animal, eating out giant fruit. And things get stranger as we come down the painting. People swimming in the husks of fruit. Somebody balancing a giant strawberry in their crotch. Person being carried in a clamshell. And maybe some type of orgy going on here in the foreground. This guy is putting flowers in this guy's butt. It looks like a real happy, frolicking place, the Garden of Earthly Delights. But on the right panel is that warning that we have come to find. This is the Last Judgment here, and it's bleak, and it's probably the strangest of the panels. World is being destroyed. Two giant ears with an arrow through them carrying a giant knife. Strange kind of bagpipe here. A person with boats for hands that is hollowed. We got a guy with musical notes on his butt and these, again, strange instruments. And in the foreground, we're seeing a bird-headed person on a toilet pooping out people that they're eating. And as they're eating this guy, he's got birds flying out of his butt. And then they're falling into this pit of despair here. He's pooping them out. It is super weird, super strange. People are being tortured, and it is the end of the world. And in the bottom right is a guy kissing a pig in an embrace with a pig, and the pig appears to have a nun's habit on. This is both fantastic and maybe somewhat of a warning to us. And when I look at it, I realize that a painter like Bosch, who painted this between 1490 and 1510, we have nothing on him in terms of our own creativity, characters like Spider-Man, the Spider-Verse, and SpongeBob SquarePants. People were very, very, very inventive and creative before us when they made art. Another theme that will pop up, especially in landscape paintings, in the Romantic era and Dutch paintings. This is from the United States, from the Hudson River school painters, Thomas Cole's The Oxbow. And here we're seeing a landscape with untouched nature on this side, and then over here farmland. When you first look at it, it looks like the whole thing is kind of natural until you realize that this is a version of the natural world that is altered by humans, and this is in fact what the United States looked like before it was cleared. And again, why I think that Europeans didn't recognize how Native Americans were using the land and were more harmonious with the land. Europeans believed that you had to alter the land and clear the land, especially to lay claim for it in the Midwest for farmers. And there is a storm that is brewing here that seems to coincide with this kind of curve here on the very small portions of that untouched nature that are left, certainly probably in Massachusetts by the time that this was painted. And the last of the themes, kind of the theme you learn in art school, how to perform your knowledge about what you know about art by making art that shows that. So art about art. On the left, we have a woodcut image from Hokusai, Japanese artist, from his 36 views of Mount Fuji around 1831. We have Mount Fuji in this thin line here, and he has really done a great job in making us believe that a storm is brewing. The trees are leaning to the right, the branches are blowing, the leaves are falling off. People are running through the rice fields holding their hats, and their clothes are billowing. And this poor scholar here has lost a lifetime of work as all of his papers fly away into the wet rice fields. Jeff Wall, a contemporary photographer, is making a photograph rather than a woodblock print and showing us really the same scene, but it's modern. You can tell from the electricity poles. You can tell from the clothes. But there is a gale here. The tree is blowing, and it definitely has that same feel. Now, all of the papers that this guy is losing, I hope that they're copies and not originals. Also, they did not actually litter to make the photograph. These were all photographed in because Jeff didn't want to litter to make the photo. In John Baldessari, a conceptual artist, in his 6 colorful inside jobs, he is doing a color wheel, something that you would learn in art school, probably your freshman year, taking a color theory class. Yellow, orange, red, green, blue, purple, primary, secondary colors, 6 colors on the wheel. And we're seeing the 6 colors in 6 colorful inside jobs. So he puts a camera in the ceiling and he hires a professional painter to paint the walls different color on 6 different days. He was wondering when he was going through art school what really is the difference between a professional painter and then a painter painting on a canvas. And so the 6 colors here were kind of showing that difference is maybe not as much as we thought. So this art influenced a student of Baldessari's, Nicole Hebron. Nicole Hebron, she did a video, 6 videos called Fountains, where she wears a different colored monochromatic outfit, holding a clear plastic bucket in her laps, and she vomits in the bucket the same color as the outfit. So Fountains was inspired by the legacy of fountain projects, and also by John Baldessari and his 6 colorful inside jobs. So the first fountain that we'll be discussing a lot in this class, from 1917 by Marcel Duchamp. Duchamp is an artist and a painter and a sculptor, and he brings a urinal to a show in New York, turns it on its side, and then carves the name ARTH in it. So as it's sitting on a pedestal in a gallery, Duchamp challenges us to reconsider what art is by saying that the artist doesn't have to create something necessarily. They can designate something as art. And what makes it art is it's on a pedestal like a sculpture, it's in a gallery, and the artist is saying that it's art. And he will do that with his ready-mades that we will see in our chapter when we study modern art. The other fountain that I think Nicole is doing with her vomit fountains is Bruce Nauman. And Bruce Nauman also was an artist who made videos. And the video that he made is Fountain, where he is just spitting water out of his mouth and standing kind of still, and he's lit with some kind of nice light there. So I think when you mix the fountain with another fountain to then another artist who has studied under Baldessari, what you can see is the kind of art that would talk about the notion of art on art, how artists comment on art. For our discussion, what I want you to do is to take a real honest, in-depth look at 2 great paintings. One done by Kehinde Wiley on the left of Barack Obama, and another one done by Amy Sherald on the right of Michelle Obama, the President and the First Lady. Both of these portraits are about 8 feet tall. They're very impressive paintings, I think, when you see them in life. But what I suspect is, when I'm asking you to define which ones you like better, most of you are going to gear towards the one that's more naturalistic, the one that follows the kind of rules of the Renaissance that Kehinde Wiley has definitely mastered, where we see Barack Obama, he is looking at us, his tie is off, he's a regular guy. He's leaning forward, he's listening to us. He's sitting in a chair, and that chair is being surrounded by native blooms from where he was born in Hawaii. It's masterfully rendered. The color and lighting in it is great. It's a really good painting. On the right is Michelle Obama also looking at us, but perhaps not taking our gaze as much as maybe judging our character. In this painting, instead of brown tones, we have a grisaille, gray scale that Amy Sherald was doing with a flat color background. She is also wearing a gown made out of cotton, the cotton that would have been picked by slaves. And then the abstract forms on it were very reminiscent of the weaving that was done by the Guise Ben ladies. To me, I think the Michelle Obama painting is more important to the collection in the United States. And the reason I believe that is I find in her painting a history of Black American painting that I don't think that history was involved in the other presidential portraits. Let me show you what the other presidential portraits look like first. Okay, so most of these portraits, they're pretty dour. We see not a lot of color. We mostly grays and browns. And we see people looking very powerful, very presidential. Their tie is on. With Lyndon Johnson on the right, we see him in front of the Capitol, kind of typical. In our previous First Lady portraits, Nancy Reagan, Laura Bush, and Hillary Clinton, we see kind of the roles of wives and mothers from the 1960s through the 1990s. With Nancy Reagan, we see a traditional woman who looks like she could be on the cover of McCall's magazine or Ladies' Home Journal. She is a housewife. In the middle image of Laura Bush, we see someone who was a librarian, someone who has a friendly smile for us, but definitely looking somewhat traditional in the kinds of clothes and the setting that she's in. With Hillary Clinton, we are seeing a woman in a suit who has political aspirations of her own that she will engage in. Okay, so these are what the portraits kind of, sampling of what they had looked like before. Here are the newer ones that I was talking about. Again, the amount of color in the background here with Barack Obama. And here, not a woman that is just simply taking our gaze in, but someone who is in her manner and in her clothes talking about a history of being Black in America. So for example, the gown. In the gown, you see these geometric patterns that are reminded of early modern painting and certainly also of the quilts that are stitched by the Guise Ben ladies, a small peninsula in Wilcox County, Alabama, and for generations, these women have got together and they have made these quilts. And these quilts are in modern art museums all over the place. And you can see references to them in Michelle's dress. Now with Kehinde Wiley, so this is a painting of Napoleon by Jacques-Louis David, him heroically leading the charge up the Alps. Here we're seeing Wiley taking the initial painting and changing the ethnicity and the time period of the person on horseback. In camouflage and timberlands, we are finding that he is painting, he is moving himself forward. We see the names on the rocks on the people who have gone before him, like Hannibal, and we got Napoleon, we've got Hannibal, and now we have Mr. Williams leading the charge. In Kehinde's work, you'll often find these gorgeous patterns, and often those patterns begin to remove themselves from the background and make themselves in the foreground. You can see that he mastered all the elements of the Renaissance, the anatomy, the perspective, the chiaroscuro. He can paint like we're looking in a mirror. And certainly you see that in the image of Barack Obama. But again, in Michelle's painting and in the painting of Amy Sherald, I see something different. And again, something that I'm very glad is now in the collection of presidential portraits. So here we're looking at two of her paintings with the flattened colors, the grisaille grayscales, the kind of lack of emotion that we're seeing in them, looking at us very kind of intensely, and also the color coming from the clothes. Again, very similar to what we're seeing here with Amy Sherald. I think Amy's work relates to some artists that come before her. Let me show you some of the things that I think we could say that her tradition is bringing into the White House. First of all, the contemporary painter of Kerry James Marshall. Kerry James Marshall is also an artist that rather than drawing natural skin tones, he has created a system for painting blackness. So he uses three kinds of black: carbon black from soot, Mars black from iron oxide, and ivory black originally from burned bone. Each has a subtly different quality of black. Then he adds yellow ochre, raw umber, and 2 shades of blue to give him 7 shades of black to work from. He does not add white into his blackness. His ideas here, he says, is that blackness is non-negotiable in these pictures. It's also unequivocal. They are black. That is the thing I mean for people to identify immediately. And they are black to demonstrate that blackness can have complexity, depth, and richness. I think Kerry James Marshall's work, I think some of his early work, especially the first painting where he paints kind of a flat back black self-portrait, the artist as a shadow of himself, I think I see the silhouettes in Bill Traylor. Bill Traylor was a slave as a boy. He was raised in the Jim Crow law South, and at the end of his life, he began making paintings without any training, and the paintings show robust, interesting black rural life in the South, and he also has really interesting takes on animals. And I think that his paintings have a relation to Kerry James Marshall and his early paintings. And again, what Kerry James Marshall is doing in terms of how to handle the skin tones, I think we see Amy Sherald taking on a different version of that. I also see in Amy's work, I see some Jacob Lawrence as well, especially when we think about the flat colors that are used in her work, the flat colors in the background that we see here and here. I see that in a number of Jacob Lawrence's pieces. So he is a painter in New York in the Harlem Renaissance. He is riffing off of Picasso and his Cubism, but Picasso's Cubism and the kind of masks that Picasso makes are totally indebted and copied from earlier African masks. And so Picasso has appropriated the African mask into European painting, and it seems that Jacob is appropriating Cubism black into African culture again. Notice that the skin tones are flat and black, and that also the background has a flattish color, and we are looking at more of a mask-like cubist quality to painting, but from a black artist. Now, I just want to kind of leave us with one more thing here, that surely what I'm saying is that this is not a complete history of black art in America. And certainly black artists do not just simply paint in a stylistic way. Sometimes with Kehinde Wiley, we see him copying the naturalism that we would find in Renaissance artists. And then I think perhaps one of the greatest artists when it comes to drawing and printmaking in the 20th century is Charles White. With Charles White, we also see dignified portraits of black people done in some of the most beautiful, smooth, talented rendering that I have ever seen in drawing. Okay, so that is my kind of how I am kind of seeing these two paintings. In our discussion, I'd like to get your thoughts on the paintings, your thoughts on what you learned from the lecture, and then what your honest opinions are in why you like one painting over another painting. I know yes, it's easy to like both of these, but just for the sake of our discussion, I want you to pick one. So for your assignments, there's a quiz on themes in art. There is an assessment on the themes. What did you learn? 4 things that you've learned. What did you like best in the lecture? And then I want you to get into one of the paintings from the presidential collection of Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, and describe which painting you like and why. And maybe you might like a painting because it has naturalism to it, or maybe after my lecture, you might begin to see why I like this other painting because of the type of history and the way that the painting looks, and that it's not purely natural, that it's stylized, and also seems to carry a legacy of other artists. Look forward to seeing what you have to say on the work, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.